Order. Yes, I will take points of order. I will take points of order. I was going to take a point of order first from Layla Moran.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As you were aware, during my question at the beginning, when I was expressing my deep sadness at the loss of Lord Ashdown and his concern for the state of where we are now, the member for North West Leicestershire shouted loudly from a secondary position, "From the grave." I find such a comment disgraceful, and I would like to ask guidance from you, Mr. Speaker, on how, for example, he might want to retract such a statement, and also if this is becoming of the sort of conduct we should expect from members of this House.
I did hear those words. I did not hear a particular member. I did not see a member mouth those words, but I did hear those words. And what I... Order, please, let me deal with this. What I want to say to the honourable lady is that I think it was most unfortunate that that was said. People sometimes do say things instinctively and rashly, but it was most unfortunate. The honourable lady was perfectly properly paying tribute to an extremely distinguished former member of this House and someone that many would regard as an international statesperson. What was said should not have been said. If the person who said it wishes to take the opportunity to apologise, it is open to that person to do so. I think it's a point of order, Mr. Andrew Bridgen. Thank you.
Speaker, I will apologise for my remarks if any offence was caused to any members of the House.
The honourable gentleman's words stand, and I thank him for what he has said. Yes, indeed. Point of order, Mr. Peter Bone.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, I've always regarded you as an exceptional Speaker and a Defender of Parliament, which I continue to do so. But I also regard the clerks of the House in exactly the same light. Now, yesterday, late last night, I went into the table office to look at the Business of House number 2 motion to see what shenanigans the government was up to. And it had been published, and I thought of proposing an amendment to that. But I was told that would be totally out of order and that there were no other amendments filed. Today on the order paper, there is an amendment to that, and that puts me in, I think, somewhat of an unfortunate position. I wonder if you could rule on what action might be taken.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his point of order, and first of all, let me thank him for his kind remarks that prefaced his inquiry. This is the first I've learned of the matter, and that makes it difficult for me to give immediate advice. It is a matter upon which I might need to reflect before giving him what I would call substantive advice. Obviously, I was not aware of the honourable gentleman's visit to the table office, of which he has now informed me. I understand that he is telling me that he was advised that the motion was unamendable, and I don't know whether he went into the table office before the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman, the member for Beaconsfield, or after. All I know is that, in my understanding, the motion is amendable. Order. In my understanding, the motion is amendable. I'm clear in my mind about that. So, insofar as the honourable gentleman is disappointed that he wasn't able to table an amendment, I understand that. Whether there is an opportunity for him to do so now seems doubtful, but I have no objection to him. Would have had no objection to him seeking to table an amendment, but I wasn't aware that he was attempting to do so. That's my honest answer to him, and I absolutely accept that he is a person of complete integrity and will always try to do the right thing. And the same goes for me. I'm trying to do the right thing and to make the right judgments. That is what I have tried to do, and I will go on doing. A point of order, Mr. Eddie Hughes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I hope you will bear with me as a relatively new member who hasn't raised a point of order before. I'm sure there might be some inaccuracy in the process. But anyway, given the comments you just made, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if you could point me towards the precedent that would allow for what seems to be an unamendable motion to be amended so that I could be informed?
The honourable gentleman, I'm not in the business of invoking precedent, nor am I under any obligation to do so. I think the honourable gentleman will know that it is the long-established practice of this House that the Speaker in the chair makes judgments upon the selection of amendments, and the order and those judgments are not questioned by members of the House. I am clear in my mind that I have taken the right course. Let me say this by way of explanation to the honourable gentleman and to the House. The motion in the Prime Minister's name is indeed a variation of the order agreed by the House on the 4th of December. Under paragraph 9 of that order, the question on any motion to vary the order should be put forthwith. I interpret that to mean that there can be no debate. But the terms of the order, I must advise the House, do not say that no amendment can be selected or moved. I cannot allow debate, but I have selected the amendment in the name of the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman, the member for Beaconsfield. At the appropriate point, I will invite him to move it once the motion has been moved. That is the position. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. A point of order, Mr. Mark Francois.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the convenience of the House, I have brought with me a copy of the original business motion, which says very clearly, and which was passed by this House on the 4th of December 2018. Under the general paragraph, towards the end of the motion, Mr. Speaker, it says, and I quote, "No motion to vary or supplement the provisions of this order shall be made except by a Minister of the Crown, and the question on any such motion shall be put forthwith." That was a motion of the House. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have not been in this House as long as you, but I have been here for 18 years, and I have never known any occasion when any Speaker has overruled a motion of the House of Commons. So, just to finish, sir, just to finish, you have said again and again you are a servant of this House, and we take you at your word. And I have heard you many times on points of order when people have challenged you said, "I cannot do X or Y because I am bound by a motion of the House." You've done that multiple times in my experience. So why are you overriding a motion of the House today?
The answer to the... I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his point of order and also for his characteristic courtesy. The answer is simple. The Right Honourable Gentleman referred to a motion, and he said that no motion in this context, for the purposes of Précy, may be moved other than by a Minister of the Crown. 'Tis so. We are not treating here of a motion, but of an amendment to a motion. Well, I'm sorry, but there is a distinction between order. There is a distinction between a motion and an amendment. What the Right Honourable Gentleman says about a motion, I accept, but it doesn't relate to an amendment. That's the answer. So no, there is no further point of order, Mr. Kenneth Clark. Kenneth Clark. Point of order, Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Sorry, that is absolutely... Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in recent years,
Order, please. The Father of the House is on his feet. Let's hear the right honourable and learned gentleman. Point of order, Mr Kenneth Clark.
My opinion, in recent years, this House has seen a considerable diminution of its powers and has often seemed rather indifferent to the eroding of some of the powers we used to have to hold governments to account. And you, Mr Speaker, have been assiduous in maximising the opportunities for the House to hold what happens to be the government of the day to account and giving the opportunity for debate and for voting. I find it unbelievable that people are putting such effort in trying to exclude the possibility of the House expressing its opinion on how it wishes handles matters. And I would suggest to some of my honourable friends, the ones that are getting somewhat overexcited, that perhaps they should don a yellow jacket and go outside to take part in this discussion.
Of course I will come back to other colleagues. I thank the right honourable and learned gentleman for what he said, which I think requires no response from me. It stands on its own. Point of order, Mr Christopher Leslie.
Point of order, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, you are in an invidious position. You have an extremely difficult job to do. But can you confirm that your rulings, whichever way they go, sometimes we will agree and sometimes we will disagree, but that it would not be in order for you to simply respond to the loudest voice at a particular point of time, or in any way to be pushed by a minority view because they are acting in a coordinated attempt to overrule your rulings, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I note what the honourable gentleman says, and he won't be surprised to know that I share his judgment in the matter. And for the avoidance of doubt and the understanding of people who are not members of the House but who are attending to our proceedings, possibly even present in the Palace of Westminster today, let me say this so that it is crystal clear from the vantage point of the Chair. What the Chair is proposing to do is to select an amendment because, in my honest judgment, it is a legitimate selection. It is for the House to vote upon order. It is for the House to vote upon that amendment and, indeed, to vote upon a motion. The Chair is simply seeking to discharge the responsibility of the holder of the office to the best of his ability. That is what I have always done, and no matter what people say, or how forcefully they say it, or how many times they say it, or by what manner of coordination it is said, I will continue to do what I believe to be right. Point of order, Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will you confirm that no amendment to the European withdrawal motion can have any legislative effect and therefore cannot override the express repeal of the European Community Act 1972 under any shape or form, which was passed under Section 1 of the Withdrawal Act by this House and by Parliament on the 26th of June this year?
The short answer is yes. The honourable gentleman is right. The honourable gentleman is right. Only statute can overrule statute. As usual, the honourable gentleman's exegesis of the situation is entirely correct. I say to the honourable gentleman, somebody chunted from a sedentary position, not as usual. Well, that was my evaluative comment on the honourable gentleman, based on long experience of him. But on that particular point, I absolutely accept that he is right. Point of order, Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You yourself have often drawn our attention to not just what goes on within this House, but the view that the public might take of the priorities we hold.
That's right,
so can I just ask, Mr. Speaker, for you to confirm what I believe that you just said as a point of order, which is that if people do not like the amendment that you have selected, the simple answer is to vote against it.
Yes, a point of order, Sir Bernard Jenkin.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask you to rule on a different matter, which is regarding Standing Order 118, which is how delegated legislation is dealt with in this House. Under subparagraph 6, it says the Speaker shall put forthwith the question thereon. That is after orders have been debated upstairs and brought to the floor of the House. And that has always been thought to mean, and has always been understood to mean, that these motions are unamendable. Forthwith means unamendable. Why have you changed your interpretation of that word in this case?
My understanding is that the motion today and the amendment are undebatable. There is to be no debate on them. I haven't made, as the honourable gentleman suggests, a change of judgment specifically for today. I understand what the honourable gentleman tells me in respect of the traditional treatment of delegated legislation, upon which he may himself be a considerable authority. I think it reasonable to say, by way of response, that I cannot be expected to make a comprehensive judgment on that related question now, but I stand by the view that I have expressed to the House. I completely respect the fact that the honourable gentleman takes a view that differs from my own, but that is in the nature of debate and of argument. And a point of order, Mr. Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has a track record on this. They have a track record of trying to prevent this House having its say over all aspects of this Brexit process. And what the public can't see, Mr. Speaker, is the Chief Whip sitting there at the end of the bench, feverishly briefing journalists and texting members in a coordinated attempt to try and undermine your judgment, Mr. Speaker. Now, the honourable gentleman opposite made a very reasonable point.
Order. The honourable gentleman is raising a point of order, and he is entitled to be heard. And he will be heard. Mr. Stephen Doughty.
The gentleman opposite made a very, very reasonable point about going into the office and about the ability to table. Is there not a problem, Mr. Speaker? The fact is that the government didn't table. They've had 4 weeks to get this right. They didn't table the Business of the House motion until, I think, well gone 5, 6 o'clock last night. There was even confusion. We were sitting, members in this House, were sitting in a meeting with the Prime Minister and the Chief Whip, and there was complete confusion about whether the Business of the House motion had gone down. It was a deliberate attempt to prevent amendments going down and for the House to know what was going on. Do you not think that's not acceptable, Mr. Speaker?
My understanding is that the Business of the House motion was tabled yesterday afternoon by the government. I confess I don't know at precisely what time, but my recollection and understanding are that it was tabled yesterday afternoon. I think it's for members to judge, in the light of the chronology of events of recent weeks, whether that was altogether helpful. Clearly, the Government Chief Whip will do what he judges to be right on behalf of his Prime Minister and his government. I acknowledge that. Whether members elsewhere in the House found it particularly helpful is perhaps an essay question, which I leave to others. Yes, point of order, Heidi Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have to tell you, I am absolutely hopping mad. When I became an MP 3 years ago, I was determined that I would not become part of the establishment. Do people in this House have any idea how out of touch the general public think we are most days? We are talking about 79 days to potentially crashing out of Europe without a deal. Should our focus not be on the detail and the arguments about the process in this place, but getting on with a plan B if the Parliament decides next week that the government's plan is not the one for the people? When are we going to start acting like public servants, doing the right thing and having the debate and getting on with it?
Well, I have the highest respect for the Honourable Lady, as she knows. I take on board what she says, and I don't dissent from it. Equally, however, if members raise points of order, it is my responsibility to deal with them as fairly and effectively as I can. Clearly, I think there will be a desire at some stage to proceed to the substance of the matters with which we are supposed to be dealing, but if there are further points of order, of course I will hear them and do my best to respond. Point of order, Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my previous job in the European Parliament, I often found I was being asked to vote on amendments that had not been debated. And one of the things I really like about this House is that before we vote on amendments, we get a chance to debate that amendment. Can you confirm that if this amendment is put to a vote today, we will have had a chance to debate it?
A very simple reason that the terms for today, specified by her right honourable friend, the Government Chief Whip, specify no debate. So if the honourable lady asks me whether there will be a debate, the honest answer to her is no, but that isn't my fault. A point of order, Mr. Angus Brendan McNeill. No, order. Of course, a point of order, the Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You will appreciate that there are members around the House who have concerns about your decision today. I think it would be very helpful to the House if you can confirm that your decision was taken in the full advice and agreement of the Clerk of the House of Commons. And perhaps to help the House, you might agree to publish the advice so that the House can understand the reason for your decision. Thank you.
Forgive me, colleagues. I do want to hear the point of order from the right honourable lady. I heard the start of it, but I didn't hear its continuation, so please, let's hear it. The Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you will have heard today, there are some concerns about the decision that you've taken in the context of the House motion that's before us. And I wondered, therefore, if you could please confirm that your decision was taken with full advice from the Clerk of the House of Commons and other senior parliamentary advisers, and whether you might consider, under these circumstances, publishing that advice for the further...
Order. I thank the Leader of the House for her point of order, and what I say to her is twofold. First of all, of course I consult the Clerk of the House and other senior clerks, and I hear their advice. That advice is tendered to me privately, and that's absolutely proper. That's absolutely proper. But it is also true that I had a written note from the clerk from which I quoted in responding to the first point of order. If the right honourable lady is... If the right honourable lady... If the right honourable lady... If the right honourable lady is inquiring whether there is what she might consider in governmental terms full written advice, a paper or a written brief or whatever, there is none such. I have just told the right honourable lady what the situation is, and I quoted from what was provided to me by the Clerk of the House, and I have given my ruling, and that is the situation. Yes, a point of order, the Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for your reply. My question is really, did the Clerk of the Commons propose that your solution was acceptable, or did the Clerk advise against it?
The answer is I discussed the matter with the Clerk of the House. The Clerk offered me advice. We talked about the situation that faced the House today. And at the end of our discussion, when I had concluded, as I did, he undertook to advise me further in the treatment of this matter. That seems to me to be entirely proper. That is the situation, and I think that is what colleagues would expect. Point of order, Mr. Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And just before I begin, I'd like to wish Michelle Barney a happy 68th birthday today. Mr. Speaker, the contention with which this amendment is held is surely all the justification that is required for members to vote in it, to decide one way or the other, and you, sir, are correct in what you're doing.
Thank you. Yes, on account of his seniority, I will take a further point of order from the Right Honourable Gentleman for Chingford and Woodford Green, but I hope he won't push his luck. Point of order, Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, I respect the Chair and I would never push my luck with you, sir. But I do ask this, because of the decision being made, it's not by any means a challenge of that decision, which is your right to make this in the Chair, but over the last 5 years, I have, on a number of occasions previously, particularly during the Maastricht debates, requested from the clerks whether or not we could amend business motions. I was always told categorically that precedent said that was not possible and therefore there was no point in doing it. I only say that as a statement. So I ask now, going forward, because this has a big impact on the government's ability to get their business regardless of Brexit, will the instruction go to the clerks that in future a backbencher wishing to amend a forthwith motion will now allow and be accepted against any business at all in this House?
Say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that it seems entirely reasonable for me to say to him that I would like to reflect on that matter. Yes. Well, yes. Well, members cavil as though there is an assumption that there should be an immediate and comprehensive knowledge of all circumstances that might subsequently unfold. Now, it may be that there are members who feel that they possess that great wisdom, and if so, I congratulate them upon the fact. I don't claim that wisdom, so I am giving, I absolutely admit, a holding answer to the Right Honourable Gentleman. I will reflect on the point, but if he puts it to me like this, do I think that it is unreasonable that people might seek to amend a business of the House motion? I do not think it is unreasonable. And if in future backbenchers were to seek to do so, it would seem sensible to me to say, let us look at the merits of the case. And finally, I just say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, attempting to respond not only to him but to some of the concerns expressed, I understand the importance of precedent. But precedent doesn't completely bind for one very simple reason, which I say for the benefit of the Leader of the House, who is shaking her head, and it is this. If we were guided only by precedent, manifestly nothing in our procedures would ever change. Things do. Ridiculous. Nothing would ever change. And I have made an honest judgment, and if people want to vote against the amendment, they can, and if they want to vote for it, they can. Yes. Point of order, Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, can I remind the House that, further to what you just said, it was because of your courage in allowing an amendment to the Queen's Speech debate which enabled a referendum test to be applied in this House, that we had the referendum in due course and we are where we are. So let nobody suggest that you, by your actions, have been undermining Brexit. Can I also say that it seems to me absolutely an own goal for this House if we start undermining your position in the chair. And I must say, as an independently minded government backbencher, that I strongly resent the fact that the government pairing whip is on the right-hand side of your chair, and he has been frequently trying to orchestrate objections to your release.
All I want is an impartial chair.
Can I... Let me say this to the honourable gentleman, the member for Christchurch. So far as his last remark was concerned, I think I can cope with that. You know, government whips going about their business in their own ways, something to which the chair is very well and long accustomed. And the notion that a government whip might now and again do things that are unhelpful to the chair is not entirely novel. I've got broad shoulders and I'm not going to lose any sleep over that. Never have done, am not doing so and never will. Secondly, what I say to the honourable gentleman, I thank him for his characteristic courtesy and his sense of fairness. He records the record accurately. I did indeed select an additional amendment to the gracious address, if memory serves me correctly, in 2013, and that was in the name of Mr. John Barron. And that amendment was on the subject of a referendum on British membership of the European Union. So what the honourable gentleman says is true. The fact is, there is a responsibility upon the chair to do its best to stand up for the rights of the House of Commons, including the views of dissenters on the government benches, that is to say independent-minded souls who don't always go with the whip, and to defend the rights of opposition and very small parties as well. I've always sought to do that, and on the Brexit issue, as on every issue, what the record shows, if I may say so, and I will, is that this chair, on a very, very, very big scale, calls members from across the House with a very large variety of different opinions. And ordinarily, when statements to the House are made, as colleagues will acknowledge, my practice almost invariably is to call each and every member, whether the government likes it or not. And that's not because I'm setting myself up against the government, but because I'm championing the rights of the House of Commons. I will come to the right honourable gentleman. Point of order, Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will you agree with me that over the last few years we've seen a big evolution of the way that the government treats motions in this House, partly brought about by the right reforms, but we've seen the widespread ignoring of motions that have passed in this House and the beginning of a practice not to vote on motions, opposition motions especially, which the government feels are somehow awkward for it. And do you agree with me, Mr. Speaker, that this has taken away from the importance of decisions this House of Commons is making? And therefore, do you also agree that allowing this House of Commons to vote on more issues in a context in which those votes have to be taken and put into effect empowers this House of Commons and demonstrates that this House of Commons is taking back control, and you as Speaker have an absolute duty to ensure that this House of Commons is taken seriously, which is why I commend you for the decision you have taken today.
Thank you. Rather than deal in detail with what the Right Honourable Lady has said, I will say that I agree with her assessment of recent events, and of course I thank her for agreeing with me. Yes, of course. Point of order, Mr. Simon Hoare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The advice of the clerks is entirely proper between you and the clerks. I think that is an accepted principle. But if this place is to operate properly and effectively, it has to be on an established rules-based system, as my right honourable friend, the member for Walton and Woodford Green, referenced. Could I ask you, sir, to reflect on two things? The first is, if there is to be what one would consider to be a fairly seismic change in the definition of terminology in this place, then the role of the Procedure Committee should be taken into account in that. And I say to you personally, we need to reflect in this place about not about the personalities, not about the politics, but about the dignity of the office of Speaker and the dignity of the Chair. I think we are, and I say this with sadness, in pretty choppy and dangerous waters at a time in our nation's affairs when, frankly, we could least afford it.
Extraordinarily grateful for the point of order from the honourable gentleman. I know he's deeply versed in the affairs of the House and takes his responsibilities to it very seriously indeed. I shall reflect most carefully on every word of what the honourable gentleman has said to me today. I agree that there could well be a role for the Procedure Committee in relation to this matter, and I thank him for what he has said. Yes, a point of order. I will come to other colleagues, if that is what colleagues wish to do. Point of order, Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Given that the crisis that the country is facing over Brexit, the fact, as my right honourable friend has just said, that the House of Commons is taking back control is something to be welcomed rather than feared. Mr. Speaker, you have made your ruling. It is clear the House should respect it.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if you could advise us how we could now move on to this business of the day, which I think the nation expects us now to turn our attention to.
The short answer to the right honourable gentleman is that I am in the hands of colleagues, and I think he knows me well enough to know that I have never ducked a challenge. That's not in my nature. It's no part of my DNA, either since I've been in this House or in all of my life before I came into Parliament. The right honourable gentleman member for Birkenhead says from a sedentary position, words to the effect, let's get on. And I would like to move on, but I do wish to treat colleagues with courtesy. Well, somebody said you can, but I will take a few remaining points of order if people wish to raise them. But I do just very gently say to the honourable gentleman from the government backbenches who just raised his point of order and talked about the dignity of the chair and the importance of our procedures, if people are going to invoke that importance, it would be helpful if they did not undermine that self-same point by continuous and repetitive dispute. Point of order, Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have 2 points which I would be grateful for clarity on. The first of all, under Section 9 of the Order of the House setting out the terms of this debate, which says that no motion may be made other than by a Minister of the Crown, you have interpreted that that allows for an amendment to be made to the motion, but then that motion as amended has to be put, which is the motion, which needs to be put by a Minister of the Crown under the order. So is it therefore the case that the motion, if amended, may not then be put unless it is adopted by a Minister of the Crown? And I then have a second point. If, Mr. Speaker, I may come on to the second point, which is the precedential...
I've heard the honourable gentleman's first point, but I would like to hear his second. Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Mr. Speaker, the second point really does relate to the interpretation of the word forthwith, and for the benefit of the Commons Journal tomorrow, how this is to be understood in future when these matters arise. If you look at page 458 of Erskine May, which I'm sure you have, it says that they must be put forthwith without any possibility of amendment, which reads as if it is a single set rather than simply forthwith qualified in this way. But the question that then arises is on the other important standing orders that are affected by the forthwith question. I think particularly of Standing Order 44 relating to disorderly conduct, which states that it must be put forthwith, but makes no mention of amendment one way or another, and it seems to me it would be deeply troublesome if forthwith came to allow for amendments under such circumstances, and therefore I think the precedential effect of your ruling needs to be clarified.
On the second point, which is not altogether dissimilar to that raised earlier by the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Chingford and Woodford Green, I'm happy to reflect on that point. It's a very serious question and it warrants a serious reply. I'm not sure that it is reasonable to expect, and I'm not sure that the Honourable Gentleman is seeking a full reply today, but if he is saying to me in his typically courteous way, Mr. Speaker, this is an important matter and we need a judgment on it, either from the Chair alone or acting on the advice, for example, of the Procedure Committee, I agree with him. On the first point that the Honourable Gentleman raised, the answer is that if the motion has been moved, it must then be put. And for the avoidance of doubt, I say that on the basis of specialist advice. Yes? Point of order, Mr. Pete Wishart.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, and my point of order is equally importantly constitutionally. Is there any means available to this House, Mr. Speaker, to communicate to the Conservative Party we're now all bored, we're now all tired of all these points of order, the nation is increasingly embarrassed by them, and how do we therefore get on with today's debate?
Yeah. Well, the Honourable Gentleman's made his point, and I'm grateful to him. Point of order, Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must say I never bore with the proceedings of this House and doing my job, even if others do. But one of the things I wanted to pick up, Mr. Speaker, is a few moments ago you said only statute can overrule statute. The Act that the motion relates to specified a period of 21 calendar days for the government to come back. This would specify 3 sitting days. Which one has precedence, and why did you select this amendment?
I've already explained the situation that appertains to the amendment, and I don't wish to be unkind to the Honourable Gentleman, but if after all of the exchanges he's still not clear as to my rationale for the selection of the amendment, I'm not sure, frankly, that I can very greatly help him. I think I'm right in saying that the reference to 21 days, as I've just been advised from a secondary position by the Clerk of the House, is a 21-day maximum. And when the Honourable Gentleman inquires about supremacy, in a sense, which takes precedence over the other, I simply make the point that that which is governed by statute is a matter of legal fact. Earlier in this series of exchanges, the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Stone, asked me to confirm his legal understanding, and I did so. And that seems to me to treat of the point that concerns the Honourable Gentleman. Point of order, Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there will be times in this House when we agree, when we disagree, but as the Speaker, I respect the ruling that you have made today. How can we put it on record that I believe that it is reprehensible that there are both honourable members and right honourable members in this House who have often advocated for us to take back control, who are now doing completely the opposite, seeking to challenge your ruling. Let's not forget that this amendment, Mr. Speaker, is seeking to decrease the uncertainty currently experienced by millions of people across our country, our constituents, our public services and our business. And on that basis, how can we make it known to people watching outside of this House that what I believe is the majority of this House respect your ruling and don't believe that what we're currently seeing and experiencing in this House is any way to conduct this affairs?
Very grateful to the Honourable Lady. I think she's made her own position very clear, as many others have also done, and that stands on the record for people to scrutinise. In terms of the issues to be voted upon today, I return, and I hope both colleagues and those attending to our proceedings out with the Chamber will understand me when I say this. I return to the point that I was making earlier. The issues are for the House to decide. I am simply making a selection and then inviting members of the House of Commons to vote and reach their conclusion. And I think a lot of people would feel that it would be seemly and advantageous if we were relatively soon, we have another piece of business first, to do so. Point of order, Shailesh Vara.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you have said that you consulted with the clerks. However, for the sake of clarity, will you kindly inform the House whether the decision that you have arrived at is different to the initial advice, to the initial advice that was provided to you by the clerks?
Not confirming or denying that. I'm saying what I said earlier, that I had a discussion with the clerk and with other clerks. We discussed the situation, the various scenarios, the proffering of advice, and I stand by what I said, and I've got nothing to add to that. And it is perfectly proper that the Speaker consults with and hears the views of the clerks who serve at the table, and sometimes other clerks as well. A point of order, Mr. Martin Whitfield.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. I really seek your guidance on behalf of myself and perhaps others in this House. There is a difference between a motion and an amendment, and if the government had wished to prevent amendments, would a better worded motion a few weeks ago relieve them of the problem they find themselves in today?
I'm not sure that I want to speculate on that, but the honourable gentleman has obviously applied his beady eye to the material on the paper, that is to say on the order paper in front of him, and he has reached that conclusion. And others may also do so. Point of order. Point of order, Mr. Nigel Huddleston.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you and your deputies have a well-deserved reputation for being absolute sticklers for protocols, processes and conventions in this place, which personally I find occasionally quite frustrating, but I utterly respect. But to that end, would it be in order, Mr. Speaker, for you, as you consider this important matter, to consult with your deputies as to the appropriateness or not of accepting this amendment?
I'm extremely grateful to the honourable gentleman, but the short answer is no. And I'll tell the honourable gentleman why the answer is no. The clue is in the title. The Speaker in the chair. The Speaker is elected to discharge his responsibilities to the House to the best of his ability. That is what I have done, diligently, conscientiously and without fail, for the last 9.5 years. Mine is the responsibility. I don't seek to duck it. And point of order, Mr. David Lammy.
Mr. Speaker, would you agree that in all of our experience in this House, it is extremely unwise to thrust civil servants and officials who give their advice in confidence and are neutral into the public domain in this way? And that when it has happened in the past, it has often ended very badly for those individuals indeed. And the House should stop that, and it is extremely inappropriate for a leader of the House to lead that charge.
Well, the honourable gentleman makes his own point in his own way with considerable force and alacrity. I respect him and I respect what he said. As to how others choose to go about their work, that's a matter for them. As far as I am concerned, I'm a member of the legislature. I am the Speaker of the House of Commons, a very important part of Parliament. My job is not to be a cheerleader for the executive branch. My job is to stand up for the rights of the House of Commons. And the Speaker will assuredly do so. Point of order, James Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In your response to the point of order from my honourable friend,
the member for Warsaw North, you made the point that this was an unprecedented thing. In response to my question, the point of order from my honourable friend for Somerset North, you said you did not necessarily intend this to be the setting of a future precedent. It is clear that it is important that you are both impartial but also, sir, seen and believed to be impartial. There is clearly a huge appetite to explore the implications of this decision. Might, sir, it be wise to not implement this particular decision at such a contentious point in time, to reflect on both, sir,
I think, had the honourable gentleman completed his remarks? He had or hadn't? No, please finish.
Would it not be appropriate, sir, to take a time to reflect on the precedents that this might set, and to make a decision in slower time at a less contentious moment in the business of this House?
To the honourable gentleman for his point of order, and I respect his sincerity. No, I respect his sincerity. But what I say to the honourable gentleman, and I hope he'll see this point, even if he doesn't agree with it, is this. The responsibility is mine. And it isn't tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. It's now. And the chair has to make his best judgment there and then. That is what I have done, honourably and conscientiously, in the firm and continuing conviction that I am right. So whilst I respect the honourable gentleman and his sincerity in his point of order, the short answer to him is no. Point of order, Angela Smith.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Any of our constituents watching this now will be deeply worried about the future of our country and will not be impressed by this spectacle. A number of the points of order that we have heard have articulated a series of finely detailed points, but they amount to the same thing, a tedious repetition. Is there anything in the rules of the House that prevent the abuse of the time made available to this House by making the same point over and over again?
Well, I don't think it's helpful when people just make the same point over and over and over again. It has to be said that, as I myself have often observed, it's not unprecedented, and the point has just been made elegantly and eloquently from a sedentary position by the honourable gentleman member for Brent North. Continued repetition is not entirely a novel phenomenon in the House of Commons. So I'll deal with it, but I do say to the House, there is a 10-minute rule motion with which to deal, and the honourable gentleman, the member for Aldershot, is waiting to present that 10-minute rule motion, and we do then have important business to dispatch. And unless people really feel they've got something new by way of a point of order that has to be raised, I would ask them in all courtesy to consider not doing so at this time. Point of order, Andrew Percy.
Speaker, can I ask you firstly to confirm that members have an absolute right to raise points of order with you and to challenge you in what I think is an excellent job you do as a servant of the House. This afternoon we have been told we're reprehensible by some members, accused of wasting time, and similarly accused of being part of a coordination. I'm part of no coordination in this place and never will be. Secondly, my second point, Mr. Speaker, is with the greatest of respect to you and the decision you made, and I am agnostic on the decision you have made. Agnostic decision you have made and believe you have the absolute right to make it. But what I would just say, Mr. Speaker, is that when we talk about the public, out there are a lot of people who believe there is a conspiracy and a stitch-up, a procedural stitch-up taking place by a House of Commons that on the substantive issue of leaving or remaining in the European Union is grossly out of touch with the referendum result. And with that in mind, whilst accepting your decision and indeed being more than happy to support you in that, could I ask just again that perhaps any advice that has been proffered on this should also be put in the public domain so the public can make their own decision about that?
has just said advice to me is private. But what I would say to the honourable gentleman is twofold. First of all, perhaps I can concur with him. I know the honourable gentleman, and I know that his whole political background and track record in this place prove that he is not part of coordinated efforts. He is very much his own person, and he knows that I've always respected him for that, as well as for a number of other of his qualities. Secondly, when the honourable gentleman refers to a perception out there, let me just again, and it to some degree comes back on earlier points of order, say this, and let me say it explicitly. It's not for the chair. I often have to say this to constituents and to people I meet around the country. Either to try to push a policy through or to prevent a policy being pushed through. That's not the role of the Speaker of the House. The role of the Speaker of the House is to chair as effectively as he or she can in the chamber, in the management of today business, including in the selection of amendments and new clauses and so on. What the House chooses to do is a matter for the House. And if that applies across the piece, manifestly, it applies to the subject of Brexit. What happens on this subject is not a matter for me. I am simply seeking to facilitate the House in deciding what it wants to decide. That has always been my attitude, and it remains my attitude, and it will continue to be my attitude. Let the House decide on the policy. And point of order, Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wasn't intending to make a point of order, but I think it's important that we place on record, certainly for myself, that in the 8.5 years I've been in this place, that every time I have an occasion to speak to any of the House officials, whether it's the table office, whether it's the clerks, whether the public bill office or the private bill office, I have been given the most brilliant advice from everyone. I think it's really improper for members here to be saying that advice given to you by the clerks in the execution of their duty should be revealed publicly. I think that's most inappropriate, and it is putting the clerks in an invidious political position.
Well, the Honourable Lady, what she said, my understanding is that it has not previously been. I don't know whether there is any precedent for such advice having been issued, but it had not previously been, and I said what I did in response to an earlier point of order on the basis, once more, of clerkly advice. I know that the clerk would concur with that view, as I do. And point of order, Mr. Crispin-Blunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This year will be 30 years since we first met in the final for the competition to be selected for Bristol South, and both of us have been on something of a journey since then. And when you were elected, Mr. Speaker, you said you would serve 9 years. You have, there has been the controversy of the recommendations of the Dame Laura Cox inquiry into the House of Commons. You have been defended by, particularly by two right honourable members on the other side, about the importance of you being sustained in this position beyond the 9 years in order to oversee the discussions and the denouement of the Brexit issue. The uncomfortable conclusion, Mr. Speaker, given the points made by my right honourable friend for Chingford and for honourable friend for Somerset North East, and the implications about the precedent you have set with this ruling today, is that for many of us we will now have an unshakable conviction that the referee of our affairs, not least that you gave your opinion and your vote on the issue of Brexit publicly, that we will have an unshakable conviction that the referee is no longer neutral. And, Mr. Speaker, I just invite you to reflect on the conclusion that many of us inevitably will have come to.
Very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his point of view. He's quite right. We met, I think, in the ante-room of the Bristol Conservative Association headquarters at 5 Westfield Park, Redland, Bristol, in July 1989. So we've known each other a long time, and I take in a perfectly good spirit what the honourable gentleman has said. I think I have explained in response to previous points of order and adduced evidence in support of my argument, including that proffered by the honourable gentleman, the member for Christchurch, that I have always done my conscientious best to champion the rights of members wishing to push their particular point of view on a range of issues, and perhaps most strikingly on this issue. That is what the record shows. I have always been scrupulously fair to Brexiteers and Remainers alike, as I have always been to people of different opinions on a miscellany of other issues. That has been the case, it is the case, it will continue to be the case. And as far as the other point the honourable gentleman made is concerned, the honourable gentleman will know that I was re-elected unanimously by this House on, I think, the 13th of June 2017 for the Parliament, and if I have a statement on that matter to make, I would of course make it to the House first, and I think that most people would accept that that is entirely reasonable. Point of order, Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I never thought that I was going to be one of the people who would care about the procedures of this House. I scoffed at people who talked in procedure, and when I arrived here I realised that actually it is the procedures of this House, protecting them and developing them, that actually will make our democracy considerably better. I wonder if you agree with me, Mr. Speaker, and I've seen 2 occasions of that this week, of what I'm about to say, is that people only care about the procedures and protecting and conserving the procedures when they don't like the outcome of the thing that is about to happen, and never when it is going in their favour.
The honourable lady has made her own point with force and style. I think we all know, let me put it like this, I won't get into that, but I think we all know from our own constituencies that people are inclined to complain about a process when they don't like a result. In this case, to be fair, the result will come only when we have votes on an amendment and a motion. But if what the honourable lady is implying is that people are complaining because they don't like the amendment that has been selected, well, you know, she's made her own point, and that may very well be so. I certainly wouldn't impugn for one moment the integrity of members of this House who have challenged me today, which they're absolutely entitled to do, and made their own points. I hope throughout these exchanges to date it will be demonstrably obvious to everybody that no matter what point people have made and how forcefully they have made it, I have heard it, and I have heard it fully, and I have heard it with courtesy, and I have responded to it with courtesy. That has been my approach, and it will always be. Point of order, Charlie Elphicke.
Mr. Speaker, can I also join with many others who've said I appreciate and respect the extent to which you listen to everyone and ensure that everyone is given a courteous and fair and proper hearing, and that the voices and votes of all people should be listened to, including, of course, the 17.4 million people who voted leave and who will be watching these proceedings and worried about the direction of the House of Commons. On the substantive question on this amendment, can I ask for your advice and guidance on the amendment itself, in the name of my right honourable friend for Beaconsfield? And the reason I raise this is I'm wondering why you selected it, as it seems to me to be defective. It says a Minister of the Crown shall table within 3 sitting days a motion under Section 13. But it seems to me there's no ability to, no sanction if a Minister of the Crown doesn't raise such a motion, nor indeed does it say which Minister of the Crown it needs to be. And if it were to be tabled within 3 sitting days, there's nothing to force it to actually be taken, because it could end up on the remaining orders and notices section indefinitely. So why are we having this sort of amendment when it doesn't actually have, it seems to me, any effect?
And again, I thank the honourable gentleman for what he said at the start of his remarks and for his usual courtesy. What I would say to the honourable gentleman on the substance of the issue is as follows. The judgment for the chair is whether an amendment, in this context we're talking about an amendment, is orderly and selectable. It is not incumbent upon the chair to seek to interpret the amendment. That's not my responsibility. And what I would say to the honourable gentleman, if he is quizzical on that point, he believes it to be, as he put it, I think, ineffective, or he said it is not effective, his inquiry on that matter should, if I may say so, be lobbed gently or otherwise in the direction of his right honourable and learned friend, the member for Beaconsfield, whose amendment it is. That, and I'm very clear intellectually on this point, that is not a matter for me. It may well be very important to the honourable gentleman and perhaps to other people, but it is a matter to raise either personally with the right honourable and learned gentleman, the member for Beaconsfield, or indirectly. I will take remaining points of order on these benches. Point of order, Adam Holloway.
Speaker, to the member for Reigate's point, we've all noticed in recent months a sticker in your car making derogatory comments about Brexit. No, this is a serious point about partiality. Have you driven that car with the sticker there?
Order. And, I think the record will show, and I have the highest regard and affection for the honourable gentleman, that I've listened to all the points of order. The only reason why I interrupt him at this point, and I hope you'll forgive me doing so, is that there was a factual error in his opening remarks. I'm sure it was an inadvertent error, and I mean that most sincerely, but it was a factual error. The honourable gentleman said that in recent months it had been noticed that there was a sticker in my car. That sticker on the subject of Brexit happens to be affixed to or in the windscreen of my wife's car. Yes. And I'm sure the honourable gentleman wouldn't suggest for one moment that a wife is somehow the property or chattel of her husband. She is entitled to her views. That sticker is not mine, and that's the end of it. Point of order, Mr. Nicholas Brown.
I think the House is now ready to move on. We've got a long day ahead of us, and I beg to move next business.
Well, it isn't a motion that I can accept, but I would like to propose that we come now to the 10-minute rule motion. Mr. Leo Doherty.